So I speculate over a lot of things, and some of you like it, some of you don't. But the reason I speculate is because you never really quite know what's coming down the pipeline. And this really proves it, because one thing I didn't even think would ever even be discussed or addressed is an item level squish in Wrath of the Lich King. So there's a big old post on Wowhead at the moment, which you can go over and read, and I'll even put a link to it in the description, which talks about all of the reasons why this happened. It also includes some clarification around PvP, engineering and Wintergrasp, and faction balance and realm populations, which we'll come back to. But first, I just want to talk about this level squish. We will get round to all the other points, but the level squish is a really weird one that's, I gotta be honest, took me by surprise. So this is an official blue post by Agrand, who's a WoW Classic game producer. Now give Ulduar time to breathe. So going to start with a little history recap here. In original Wrath of the Lich King, Ulduar occupied an interesting design space, as even the normal modes for many of the bosses were a pretty large cut above Naxxramas. That's both 10 and 25 in terms of difficulty. For many players just joining World of Warcraft during at the start of Wrath of the Lich King, Naxx was potentially their first raid, and as Naxx was so accessible, it had huge participation. Ulduar, however, had much lower participation, and many groups that were successfully clearing Naxx and the other tier 7 raids suddenly found themselves struggling. Overall, a few different things were tried, including some nerfs to Ulduar, as well as trying to get a new raid out to players to bridge the gap between Ulduar and ICC. The raid was released around 3.5 months after Ulduar, Trial of the Crusader that is, and was released with gear equivalent to another full tier up from tier 8 gear, with the addition which provided an even larger item level jump over normal mode than rewards for defeating hard mode encounters in Ulduar were. By early World of Warcraft raid tier standards, Ulduar had a relatively short run for being effectively replaced and outclassed by significantly better rewards from a much more accessible raid in Trial of the Crusader. As years have passed, we think it's safe to say that Ulduar is now regarded as one of the best and most unique raid experiences in WoW, and those that enjoyed it undoubtedly felt like it was cut quite short. We want to make sure that Ulduar is front and centre during its time in Wrath Classic and still has healthy amount of time to breathe before Trial of the Crusader is released. And by extension, Season 7 for Arena is introduced. This bridges to the next major goal for this change. Now, before we carry on with that, you need to understand exactly what we're talking about here. So, without reading word for word exactly what the post on Wowhead says, basically they're considering, and it's not guaranteed, they're considering nerfing the item level of Trial of the Crusader gear. And this is to encourage people to continue running Ulduar even when the next tier of content comes out. Now, I think it's great. I love Ulduar, everyone loves Ulduar, and I think it's probably, like they've said here, everyone remembers Ulduar and remembers it as being cut too short. I think it's because it was cut short is the reason we remember it so fondly. None of us remember Dragon Soul in Cataclysm as a great raid, even though it was actually a great raid. There was nothing wrong with Dragon Soul as a raid. The problem was it went for so long. Ulduar didn't, so Ulduar had its fleeting success. Had Ulduar run for an additional 3-4 months, even you and me, somebody who loves Ulduar, may not look at it quite as fondly. But if we jump to the Wowhead post, they're saying there's been a lot of discussion regarding raid lockouts for Wrath of the Lich King, but Blizzard did finally confirm that 10-man and 25-man raids will not share a lockout. So that's good news. That's what we want to hear. But with just reading the headlines of this post, because it is a hefty post, they're saying when WOTLK came out, there basically was no point to go to Ulduar anymore. That's the first thing that I'd say is wrong, because there's lots of achievements in Ulduar, and there's lots of achievements that are difficult in Ulduar, and even in ICC, you'll still probably want to go back and try and get Valinir, even if it's just for the achievement for your guild. So I don't like the fact that they say straight away when WOTLK comes out, Ulduar is redundant, because it's really not. But reading on, the idea right now is basically to take all WOTLK gear and drop them about 13 item levels. So the items from hard mode Ulduar are just a little bit better than WOTLK normal, but items that drop in WOTLK hard modes are better than what drops in Ulduar. Now, I see what they're trying to do, and you know I'm really all up for changes. Any changes that really make the game better, really make our experience a lot better, but this, it really doesn't make that much sense to me, because the normal gear in WOTLK 10 doesn't really make Ulduar 25-man hard mode gear redundant, not in the slightest. if you drop it by 13 item levels, that would bring it down to 219 eye level. This is just from 10-man. Or for 25-man normal, it'd bring it to 232 item level. So that's the original item level of 10-man. Now, just from 10-man hard mode, as an example, you'll be able to get 232 eye level. So what we're saying is, you can get better gear from 10-man hard modes than you can from 25-man normal in the following tier of content. I'm not sure if that seems right. What they went on to say is what we want is something like what happened in Burning Crusade Classic, where players were still going into SSC and TK at the same time Black Temple was out. There's a lot of different activity across levels so that everyone was able to play different things and run their ults. It was sort of a vibrant ecosystem of raids. I completely see that, but you'll still be running Ulduar on ults, and as I say, you'll still be running Ulduar on mains, even if it is just to get your other healer is Valanir, or it is to do achievement runs, or, you know, there are still really good items. Even when TOC releases, there'll still be, like, hard mode Ulduar gear, 239 eye level. It's still better than 10-man TOC. And don't get me wrong, once you start doing 25-man TOC, yeah, all the gear's better. But is the gear not meant to be better as you go on through the tiers? They then go on to say, whereas if we don't do any changes to Trial of the Crusader, the moment it comes out in Wrath Classic, people will stop raiding Ulduar. False, in my opinion. Eventually, people might be a little bored after a few months asking when is ICC coming, because there just isn't enough going on. As for PvP Gladiator gear in Season 7, it would likely also see a reduction in item level to match that of Trial of the Crusader. Looking back on it, the power level from Season 6 to Season 7 is quite drastic, likely because the PvP gear had to stay on par with the new raid gear. In a way, Blizzard thinks lowering the item level on PvP gear will be healthier for the game, as the transition into a new arena season won't be as large a spike in a player power. Now, my opinion on it might be a controversial one or an unpopular one, but is it not just best just to keep Ulduar out for a bit longer? So if it was only out for 3.5 months and everyone looked at it so fondly and you don't want people to stop running it as quick, then just keep it out for longer? Because ultimately, once you get to the point where you've got all your Ulduar gear, you're not that bothered about going back to Ulduar anyway. So if we're saying that it's going to be rushed, yeah, so it's going to be rushed, we're going to get TOC quite soon after Ulduar where you haven't already got all of your Ulduar gear, then it doesn't really matter because the gear from TOC should still be an upgrade. If you've been raiding every week and you've been clearing it every week, you've got all your gear from Ulduar, so you still haven't got any reason to go back. You've probably just been farming it for what I said before, achievements or getting Valanir or whatever. So if you're keeping up with the content and you're in a guild that's consistently clearing content, then you've not got that much reason to go back anyway once TOC comes out. If you're not one of those and you haven't cleared all content, you haven't done all the hard modes and stuff like that, and there are upgrades in Ulduar, most of you are probably not that bothered because the gear in TOC is better, so you'd rather put your effort into doing TOC. It doesn't matter if it's a 5 item level increase or a 13 item level increase, it's still better gear. So you're still going to want to go and prioritize the raid that gives you better gear. If you've got time to go back to Ulduar and get some upgrades, you're going to do that. But you would still do that anyway. If the item level wasn't decreased, you would still go back to Ulduar to try and get a few upgrades for some of your other raiders or ults or whatever. The actual jump in item level doesn't really matter, if you know what I mean. If there was a chest in Ulduar that was an upgrade from what you're using, and you've just cleared TOC, and the chest that drops in TOC that you wanted didn't drop, you would still go back and try and get the chest from Ulduar to tide you over till you get the one from TOC. So I'm not sure why playing around with item level, which is then definitely going to have a knock-on effect into ICC, because if you're nerfing TOC, you're going to have to nerf ICC. I don't get the change. Oh, and then he said, as for Icecrown Citadel, this also means those item levels will also need to be shrunk down. Just an absolute waste of time. And again, I really don't want you to think that I'm sat here being negative, because I'm not, like, by any stretch of the imagination. I really embrace change for Wrath. I want them to make Wrath the best possible Wrath that we can get, even if that does upset people who just want the exact same version of Wrath we had in 2008. I don't want that version. That version exists on private servers. I want a little bit of a spiced up version of Wrath, but changes like this, I can't get on board with. So Chris Zyher had this to say. Thinking about how raiders will react to ICC with reduced item levels, we think that will actually make ICC much more enjoyable for hardcore raiders, whilst also making the relevance of the raid last longer. Everybody remembers ICC as the final tier of content. I know you've got Ruby Sanctum, but really, everyone remembers ICC as the final raid. So making it longer... In regards to class balance, Blizzard stated that 3.3.5's balance was heavily influenced by arenas. Crusader went on to explain, as for Death Knights, they went out the door, they were way too overpowered. Players kept finding new ways to make Death Knights more powerful than was intended, and I don't think any of the nerfs to Death Knights over Wrath of the Lich King were ever unjustified. Fair point, they wasn't. He's absolutely right. So if something like that happened again, surely you're going to make changes. And I'm worried they'll be too strong again in Wrath Classic. Players will probably find new ways to make them too strong. He's definitely going to intervene and change them, obviously, if they're... Because he said, back in the day, they were too strong, the changes weren't unjustified. He fears already that Death Knights are going to be too strong, and we as the player base are going to find ways to make them even stronger. So he's definitely going to make changes to them. We will be watching class balance closely, and my perspective is we should just let it be. What? After what you just said? Unless a class is pushed out entirely and the community says this class is complete junk, we don't even bring them anymore, and then I think we should look at it. Right, so a class can be completely overpowered, like, really overpowered, and, we'll just let it be. If there's a class that's completely broke and for some reason can't even get invited to a group, then you might look. I don't know what's going on in this post, I'll be honest with you. Now, jumping back to the blue post itself. So they've also said that if they do these changes to the item level, it will allow them to increase the difficulty slightly in later tiers without changing bosses or the mechanics themselves. So we have a ton of reverence and respect for the encounters in Wrath of the Lich King Classic, and we want to make as few adjustments here as possible. Slightly lowering overall player power going into a raid like ICC allows our modern, more savvy Classic players to have a bit more of a challenge in that raid without needing to make risky changes to the encounters themselves. And with the progressive raid buff system that comes in later in ICC, we still feel like this raid will be accessible to raid groups of varying skill levels after some time passes. I gotta admit, I do see that. Yeah, so making ICC a bit more difficult by lowering everybody's gear across the board. When you're going into ICC, you're going to have an average overall 13 item levels lower, assuming you was full bis in tier 9. I see that making it a bit more difficult. But then they've also mentioned about reducing the item level of the gear that drops in ICC as well. But we'll keep it difficult, and you're going to get upgrades over the gear that you're using in TOC, but I still struggle to see the point of any of this, if I'm honest. So Chris Zyhert was one of the designers responsible for planning itemization during original Wrath of the Lich King, and he's back on our team now working on the classic version. He oftentimes says that a stated goal of gearing and scaling in original Wrath was to avoid the situation we got in at the end of Burning Crusade, where certain classes and roles scaled so well that they had to make major systematic adjustments to Sunwell Plateau to compensate for this. The most notable example of this is Sunwell Radiance, which effectively reduced the avoidance of all tanks by a flat, massive amount. While effective, this debuff never felt great because it meant that the progression of your character meant little when you got to Sunwell, as there was a global debuff that negated the benefits you got from your hard-won gear across the board. As alluded to above, Trial of the Crusader's injection into the overall design of raid progression in Wrath of the Lich King conflicted with those original goals and intent, and ultimately led to the same type of scaling problems that were faced late in Burning Crusade. We feel that an adjustment here could help with the concern when we get to ICC and add up to a more interesting experience overall. We totally understand that at face value, nerfing gear is a scary prospect, but we are committed to taking extreme care to not make too many waves and ensure that in relative terms, classes and roles that excelled in later expansions will continue to feel powerful as they progress. Thank you for reading if you got this far, and apologies for the length of this, but floating a change like this really needs a thorough explanation and reason for context. We wanted to start with a focused group of community council members, and we'd love to get feedback on this in the coming weeks. We still have time to make further adjustment to this idea. Well, it's a terrible idea, just don't do it. honestly, I just don't see the need. And I don't know how many times to say that I'm trying not to be negative here, because I'm really not. I can't wait for Wrath. I'm as excited for Wrath as you are. I literally cannot wait till pre-patch on Wednesday so I can finally start on the fresh servers and get ready for Wrath. But with things like this, it's unnecessary. Like, as I say, achievements are there to keep you going back and doing older content. You know, you got all the Nax achievements. So if you don't get them all finished off during Nax itself and you're in Ulduar, you'll still want to go back and do Nax. If you don't get all the Ulduar achievements done, you'll be in TOC, but you'll still go back and do Ulduar. You only need so much reason to go back and do the previous raids. The point of progression, surely, is to move on. You progress, you get better gear, you move on to the next raids. You don't want to be, like, I'm not going to say forced, but you're not going to want to feel forced to go back and do Ulduar, which you've already been doing for, let's hope, 5 to 6 months, to then move on to TOC, but to only have all of the item level of TOC nerfed, so you need to continue to run Ulduar. Because Ulduar's great, but you'll still get a little bit bored after it, and after 6 months, and you'll want to see the back of it and move on to the next raid. And then once you're bored of the next raid, you want to move on to the next one. You don't want to continually keep running the same raid over and over again. Because let's say Ulduar was out for 5 months, and let's say TOC was out for 4 months. But the Ulduar gear is quite close to the TOC gear, where actually some of it, especially like with the item level being reduced, some of like the armor pen stuff in Ulduar might actually end up being more or less BIS, even in tier 9. So then you're still having to run Ulduar every week and TOC every week. You might choose to do that anyway. Your guild might choose to just run Ulduar every week. But on the basis that they should drop down, like when TOC comes out, Ulduar should drop down to Emblems of Heroism. So if you're not after specific pieces of gear, you're not even going to get the good emblems from there. I don't see what the point is, personally. Now, I'm quite conscious about the length of this video, because currently, without cutting out anything I've said, I've been recording for just over an hour. So really quickly, PvP, Engineering, and Winter Grasp. One of the requested features for Arena in Wrath of the Lich King is the possibility of using Nitro boosts in the first Arena season of Wrath Classic. During the original expansion, engineering items were eventually removed from use in the arena, and some players have a nostalgic memory of the time these items were allowed. Arna Resendez explained, on the topic of PvP and arena gear, our thoughts at the moment are looking at the first season, allowing it to be original as possible. For example, items from engineering will be allowed in arena, and some players have some nostalgia around these items. We will be monitoring it and watching how players approach this, and possibly change it for later seasons. On the topic of Winter Grasp, for Winter Grasp, there will be multiple instances of the battleground region-wide, and these will be taking place simultaneously. So as long as one player in a faction or a realm wins in their battleground, the entire realm will have access to Vault of Archivon. It is possible that both sides will win on a realm, which would give access to VOA to both sides. So Vault of Archivon to kill the boss once a week to get a chance at either getting PvE gear or PvP gear. We knew that already, but bit of clarification. So both Alliance and Horde on a server at any given time could own Vault of Archivon. That's good. I like that. Now, faction balance and realm populations. I'm going to skip through all of the bit where they're just talking about sort of how faction balance is at the moment and all of that, and we're going to focus on this one sentence here. This creates a weird situation where Blizzard has a difficult problem to solve. Josh Greenfield said, instead of trying to twist players' arms and force them to move to certain servers, we'd like to try a design solution to this. Essentially, the idea is that if you are the underdog faction, you have a massive bonus. Something like 50% increased honor, 20% increased experience, 10% increased bonus reputation, and loot bags from quests, or whatever. I don't know why you had to say or whatever at the end. What we really want to lean into is if a realm achieves a certain level of faction balance, both factions get the reward, or maybe both factions get a reward and it's doubled. Blizzard stressed that they think the right approach to fixing faction balance would be a reward-based system. Now, they have spoke about not rolling it out basically as a test on the mega servers that are 99% skewed in one faction, but trying it on some of the more balanced servers but not completely skewed. I like that. I honestly do. I think that it is the only way you're going to balance the faction is a reward-based system, but it needs to be very clear from the moment you're creating your character, where it says, if you create your character on this server, you will get 20% more XP. And it will tell you why. It will say, because, you know, it's 80% Horde, preferably, and 20% Alliance, and you're the Alliance. You know, preferably even give a rough figure, but it needs to be clear. Because if you're a new player or a returning player, you don't look at Ironforge Pro, you don't know anything about the servers, you'll just pick a random server, maybe based on name, and then try and create a character. Then you end up on a 1%, you know, faction represented server on what you want to be. So if you want to be Alliance, you end up as part of that 1% Alliance. You never even get to max level, you quit. Because you can't get groups for anything, you know, nothing at all. Whereas if you was at least told on the character creation screen, you're going to get this. But you're going to get this because XYZ. It's because, you know, there's only 25% Alliance. Trying to faction balance, you know, I just think a bit of transparency for returning or new players would be good. But overall, it's really late. I've been drinking all day and barbecuing all day, so I'm going to edit this now and I'm going to go to bed. So overall, it's news. I was going to say it's good news. I really don't like the item squish idea, if that wasn't clear. But I do like the faction balance attempt at, you know, making it more rewarding and stuff for the lower represented faction. And I think that's good. So if you think it's good, drop a comment below. If you don't think it's good, drop a comment below. Like and subscribe, and roll the outro. There's lots of ways you can support the channel to keep me here putting out World of Warcraft content and covering all future MMOs. Consider joining the channel as a member. You get access to emotes. Everyone will know you're a member when you comment on future videos because you get a nice icon next to your name. And you get access to members-only videos, which I'll be putting a lot of on the channel throughout the year. Additionally, there's a Patreon link in the description as well. Thank you for watching all the way to the end, and I'll see you on the next one.